eyes and your vision are under attack. Damaging blue light from the sun, your phone, your computer, your tablet, even light bulbs and car headlights is constantly bombarding you. The good news is our eyes actually already have a line of defense to counter the effects of blue light. This defense is made up of 3 pigments called carotenoids. MacuHealth with Micromicelle, the only supplement with the exclusive patent on all 3 macular carotenoids and Micromicelle technology.
Do your patients know what presbyopia is?
There are people who are afraid of the press.
Have you talked to your patients about multifocal contact lenses?
I've heard the bifocal, but not multifocal.
Not multifocal.
Do you need help with your multifocal strategy? Learn more at the conclusion of this episode. With more screen usage and indoor time, myopia, also known as nearsightedness, is increasing and getting worse in children. Now, certified eye doctors can prescribe MiSight One Day, the first and only FDA-approved soft contact lens to slow myopia progression in age-appropriate children. Visit CooperVision.com to find a Brilliant Futures certified eye doctor near you. Good morning, I'm Dr. Kerry Gelb, and welcome to Wellness 1280 on Open Your Eyes Radio. Please listen as I discuss the newest information in the world of health, nutrition, and sports every Saturday morning, 6 a.m. Central Time on AM 1280 The Patriot. Also, please share your thoughts by emailing me at drkerrygelb@gmail.com. That's drkerrygelb@gmail.com. And visit my new website, wellness1280.com, where we have all guest links, Wellness 1280 info, and previous shows. Wellness is taking over the Patriot Airways for the next hour. So sit back and enjoy my investigative report on the dark side of bodybuilding. Today, we're exploring a world where physical power often hides emotional pain. The intense, image-driven world of female bodybuilding. While the spotlight celebrates strength and symmetry, behind the scenes are stories of hormone disruption, disordered eating, pressure to be feminine, and a silent struggle to maintain health while chasing perfection. Our guest today is Jen, face hidden, for obvious reasons, a former competitive bodybuilder who's here to courageously share what few are willing to say out loud. Her firsthand experience peels back the glamour to reveal the physical and emotional toll of the sport, especially on females. This isn't just about muscles. It's about the price women pay to fit an ideal. Let's open our eyes and ears to what's really happening beneath the surface. Jen, thank you for joining me today on Open Your Eyes Radio and podcast with Dr. Kerry Gelb.
My pleasure.
So Jen, tell us a little bit about your story growing up, when you became involved in bodybuilding and why you became involved in bodybuilding.
I would say growing up, I was always a little bit on the heavier side and, didn't exactly fit the typical mold of a child. I always carried some extra weight, and that continued into my teens. And I wouldn't say that I was unnecessarily unhappy, but there came a point probably about 20 years old where I reached my heaviest, which was about 235 pounds. And I just made a decision that I was ready to change my life for the better. I was ready to change my appearance and feel good about myself. And within that year, I lost, I went down to 165 pounds. That was all naturally. And that was my initial weight loss and my initial accomplishment. And shortly thereafter that, my brother, who was already been a bodybuilder for a few years, he decided he would make me his guinea pig and introduce me to that world. And so about a year after my initial weight loss, I competed for the first time at the age of 23.
And how tall are you? So people kind of get a
5'10".
You're 5'10". So you're fairly tall.
Mm-hmm.
And typical female bodybuilders, are they that tall or are they? Or
I would say I was definitely on the taller side. I would say average is maybe 5'7" or 5'8", because the taller you are, the more difficult it is to put size on, especially on your legs. So I was definitely tall for a competitor.
And when you went as a bodybuilder, at what point did you decide, I'm going to be a bodybuilder where I'm going to try to go pro or very high amateur? where I might have to use drugs to be involved in bodybuilding?
Well, I think that's sort of a given out of the gate. Like I would say that I started experimenting, with anabolics before I competed for the first time. So the goal at that point in time was not to go pro. I was young. I don't, think I thought much about that part of it. It was back in a time where it wasn't on social media. You weren't, posting progress pics to show how you look and announcing it to the world. You had to use dial-up internet and, find the contest and, dig through photos to find it. So it was really just for me at that time, not for like the notoriety or the intent of going pro, but it was kind of a given even that long ago, it's just 20 something years ago, that was part of the sport. Unless there's somewhere in the specific title which says like a natural bodybuilding foundation, it's just a given that to be competitive, that's a requirement.
And when did drugs get involved in bodybuilding? When Arnold was a bodybuilder and Frank Zane?
Oh yeah, I would say like forever.
It's always been involved.
Mm-hmm. But it's what I've seen. The trend is especially now that I've been out of it for 10 years, it just like seems to exponentially increase, over time, like bigger, stronger, more shredded, more vascular, all these different things. So I think the amount has definitely increased over the years.
And before we talk about some of the drugs, I understand now they actually inject oils into the body.
Oh yeah, that's been a
What's that all
long
about?
thing too. But synthol is kind of like if you have a certain muscle group that, doesn't grow or doesn't respond, you can inject synthol directly into that particular muscle group. However, when you compete, it's pretty obvious because it doesn't look the same as a muscle. It just kind of looks like a strange bubble of sorts. So you can use it, but it's pretty obvious to judges.
Now, the big time bodybuilders, do they use it as well or not really?
I mean, maybe at an amateur level where, the judges may not discount you points because of it, but pro bodybuilding these days, no, I don't think that would be a common thing.
And to watch your progression as a bodybuilder, I heard Frank Zane in an interview say that looking in the mirror doesn't work, that you have to take pictures of yourself to see what you really look like.
Oh,
And
for sure.
talk about that just for a minute, how you monitor your progress.
Well, so back when I first started, I mean, I always had a coach. So your coach is your extra eyes because it's hard to look at yourself and think, okay, I'm where I need to be. So that's the purpose of hiring a coach. Even the last time I did it, I know what to do, but I don't have those outside eyes to kind of judge it. So, 20 years ago, it was just like, using a video recorder and, doing the poses and taking measurements, taking body fat measurements, tracking your weight. But now I would say it's more common to just use the cell phone and take pictures every week, every 2 weeks, whatever your coach decides is, enough time in between.
And speaking about coaches, coaches in bodybuilding, are they pushing the drugs? Are they really out for the bodybuilder? Or are they really just out for the win? How much do they care about the bodybuilder?
I would say that depends on the coach. So I've had several over the years. I've had some that definitely push on the higher side and they're not concerned with, what the possible complications could be with that. My last coach, however, was super conservative. He, especially for females, he wanted as little as possible. So I think his approach was definitely the best for me, given my genetics are really good. I never needed the amount that I had done in the past with other coaches, and that, the outcome was the same. I mean, I looked better than I ever have, and he was super conservative and didn't push at all.
You see that many bodybuilders actually die very young.
Mm-hmm.
Boston Lloyd comes to mind. He died in 2020. He grew up in a family of bodybuilders. Now, when you're going through this and you see that some of these famous bodybuilders are dying in their 30s and their 40s and even in their late 20s, how does that affect you as a bodybuilder?
I think that it is like far more common with the males because the males have to take exponentially more than females do and harsher drugs, etc. So the biggest issue with these male bodybuilders is just the sheer size of them, but also the muscle is, the heart is also a muscle, so it grows at the same time and the body can't keep up with it. So it never like frightened me in that way because, it's much different between males and females. But I mean, it is an alarming trend with the men for sure.
I had a friend, he was actually a personal trainer of mine, and he worked with me, worked with my daughter, and he was a professional bodybuilder, and he passed away in his early 40s from bodybuilding. He had a heart attack. His heart was 65% larger than a normal heart, had to work so hard. His hemoglobin went way high. It's just really, it's just something really that I guess it gets so addictive. You just want to get bigger and bigger.
Oh, addictive is the key word there for sure.
And the term bigorexia, that was coined back in, I think, in 1980 in People magazine, just trying to get big and big. We're up against a break. I'm speaking with Jen. She's anonymous. We're talking about the dark side of bodybuilding. When we get back, we're going to get into some of the drugs that are used by bodybuilders. This is Dr. Kerry Gelb for Open Your Eyes Radio. We're back with Jen. We're talking about the dark side of bodybuilding. And before the break, we were talking about some of the bodybuilders that have passed away. And that you mentioned it's more common in males than females. But have there been any females that you are aware of that actually have passed away from bodybuilding?
Yeah, just actually in, recent years, there's been a couple stories of females that really just from the use of diuretics have ended up, with heart attack or what have you from the electrolytes being thrown off, and or they use diuretics for the show and then they try to do cardio afterwards. And one I know had a heart attack on a treadmill. So those are the more common things that you see with the females is the use of diuretics because they're harsh.
And why do they use diuretics? I assume it's to help them get cut, but why do they use them?
You use them like the last 3 days while you're also tapering down your water intake. And that's the diuretics are used to pull all of the subcutaneous water, from the body so that there's just none there. It's just, pure muscle and skin. And that's what creates that look, which is very temporary, but that gets you ready for that day on stage.
And have you ever experimented with diuretics?
Oh yeah. And they made me feel awful. Like that was by far like the part that I dreaded the most. Some people I think handle it better than others, but everybody says, what did you eat, after your show? I'm like, you do not care about eating. You just want to drink because you have a headache, you're cramping. It's a pretty miserable feeling for sure.
And pretty much everybody's using it, whether male or female, will use diuretics.
At a higher competitive level for sure. Like I don't think that natural bodybuilders are allowed to even use that, but you would be able to tell a significant difference if someone had or had not.
So talk to me about the steroid part in bodybuilding. Steroids are interesting because there are steroids that are anabolic and androgenic, and with bodybuilding, they're trying to make them just anabolic, so to grow. So some of the steroids are or steroid-like drugs are testosterone-like drugs are maybe 10 to 1 anabolic to androgenic, 5 to 1 anabolic to androgenic. So talk to me about those, the oral ones and then the injectable ones. Let's start with some of the oral ones like Anabar or Westrol. Tell us about that and how does that affect the body?
Well, so as far as women's bodybuilding, how it was always explained to me, my brother was kind of like, yes, as I said, he was the one who got me into it. So he kind of guided me through, and he always said there's kinds that are okay for girls and there's kinds that are not okay for girls. So in other words, things like Anavar that are not going to have any masculinization effects and, voice changes and such, those are considered, girls' drugs. And then there's kinds that, if you're willing to gamble with it, you run the risk of, facial changes, facial hair changes. It's just a matter of how far you're willing to go to get bigger. I have really good genetics, so I didn't really have to go over to that side. So I stuck with things more like oral Anavar, maybe some injectable Winstrol for about 6 weeks, injectable growth hormone, things like that. But I never ventured onto that other side.
So tell me what kind of side effects did you have and what kind of side effects will other people have when they use some of the stronger drugs?
I think a lot of that is based on your genetic makeup. That whole idea of like roid rage and acne for men. I think if you're genetically predisposed to that, that's likely to happen, but not necessarily. For me, the only real change that I saw was, when I was young in my early 20s, I had got something that I think was not what it was supposed to be. So it did change my voice, and pretty much overnight. And it was a significant change, which stays, forever. But aside from that, growth hormone can create a little bit of bone growth. So my feet are bigger, my hands are bigger, but nothing as far as my, face or anything like that.
And talk about some of the ones that, for the men, what they take, you know, some of the ones some of the steroids that they take.
I think the ones for men are like significantly harsher. There's like Tren and some of the bigger ones that have like real personality changes, and they just have to take more because the guys now are just enormous. It's just incredible.
And Tren is injected, right?
Yeah.
Tren is injected. Have you ever taken Tren?
I had some coaches that told me to take that despite me telling them that I would get too big too fast, and they said they wanted me to try it anyway. And I think it was 2 weeks, and I put on like 15 pounds almost, and they were like, never mind. So they pulled it.
Now, can you tell when somebody's taking these drugs? Since you're in it, like if you're watching a baseball game, can you tell if one of the baseball players is taking it or
I mean, in the gym for sure. Yeah, like it would take me all of 10 seconds to figure it out.
And what would you see in them that you would know that they're taking some of these testosterone type drugs?
I mean, the biggest thing is like the level of like hardness and like being shredded that's just not naturally attainable. Like when I see a female that's, especially maybe like in my age bracket, and they have that really like hard, tight look and they have some size on them, that's just not really typically achievable for a female, especially, older.
When they used to talk about Barry Bonds taking steroids, that his head got bigger. Is that possible? Does your head really get bigger?
Well, the growth hormone, it grows cells. So whatever is made up of cells can grow, including bones. So like typically it's like that bone above, I don't know what it's called, but above your eyebrows, like that can grow outwards, hands and feet.
So when you're working with clients, you go to the house and work with clients. Do you ever have regular clients that say, "Look, I want to go into professional bodybuilding. How do I go about getting these drugs?" Because most of these drugs are not legal, so they have to get them online somehow. How does that conversation go?
I don't train people for competitions anymore. I used to, and a big part of it why I don't anymore is number one, because I left that kind of behind, but it's also because, I would have to be really honest. I'm not going to tell somebody that they can do it naturally and be competitive. And I also don't want to be responsible for even telling them where to access it, because I don't want that on my conscience or, as a liability or what have you. But I was always very open when women would say, well, I want to look like you. I'm like, well, this is what's involved in it. Like I never really tried to hide that because I felt like that was misleading to a client.
And how many hours would somebody that's a professional bodybuilder have to be in the gym? I go to the gym, I try to be in a half hour, 45 minutes tops. But somebody that's a professional bodybuilder, how long would they have to be there for?
Well, it progresses. So as you get closer to a show, then there's, the cardio goes up as the weeks go on. So I would say at the end of my last one for the last month or so, I was probably doing 45 minutes of fasted cardio in the morning, and then 5 days a week of heavy weight training for about an hour.
And you do this different body parts. How many days a week will you do one body part? A professional, like somebody like me, but somebody like you that's really knows what they're doing, that's a professional. Or, someone like Ronnie Coleman, how often do they actually train their biceps or their chest?
I think it depends on, everybody has, lacking body parts or body parts that are behind. So my upper body is really naturally muscular. I never had to train it as hard. So upper body was once a week, every part for me, but legs, because I'm tall, it's hard to get size of them. So I definitely train legs twice. And when I have clients, that have certain body parts that are weaker than others, those are the body parts that, we typically train more than once a week.
So one of these big time bodybuilders, they only do chest once a week. They won't do it more than once a week.
I think it varies from person to person, but mine was very chest, back, shoulders, arms, legs. But I always found a second time to throw legs in there.
And how many sets would you do, and how many reps would you do? Would you do high reps, or would you do low reps, heavyweight? How do you decide what you're going to do?
I actually, the first couple that I did, it was very, traditional, just heavy weights and, 3 to 4 sets per exercise. I did do some experience with volume training because I was doing 2 shows back to back. I had to go back to a local show to requalify for nationals. So I thought, well, I'm probably going to win this local show. So let me just experiment with like volume training and see what the difference is. And for me, I responded really well to both. I think that it was easier for me to lift heavy for less reps, but I definitely had really great response I've done leg press sets of 100, then 75, then 50, then 35, then 25. So really, really high in that range. So it's a preference, but I did find that both worked pretty similar for me.
And which way do you think is less risk? I mean, for yourself, for people listening, go out and hire a personal trainer. But for yourself, which way was less risk of getting injured?
Well, then I don't think it was as big of a risk, but now that I'm older, I definitely don't try to do that really heavy lifting for 6 to 8 reps anymore, just because it's not worth the injury risk to me. I'd rather, do some volume training, higher repetitions, and get the same result.
And did you ever have sprinting as part of your routine?
Yeah, I hate it, but it works.
And tell me about sprinting. What does it do for us? And I did a podcast on abdominal obesity, visceral fat,
Mm-hmm.
and they would say that sprinting was the best to get rid of visceral fat. But that's from a doctor's point of view, but from a bodybuilder's point of view, what do you think?
Well, I think that distance running is, great for the your lung capacity, et cetera. And a lot of people, it clears their head. But for bodybuilders, distance running would, never be the thing that you would go to. You'd go for short sprints. And yeah, it's more of like a fat burn as far as like, a cardio activity. So I never did any kind of distance running. It was always, some sprint work.
And what age would you recommend kids that want to start lifting weights? I know you have a young son, you have a couple sons.
Well, I would say, it varies on kid to kid and their puberty stages, but I think 14 is a pretty good age to start.
Well, hold it right there. This is Dr. Kerry Gelb. We're up against a break. You're listening to Open Your Eyes Radio. We'll be back with Jen after the break.
MacuHealth, your science-born and tested solutions for visual performance, macular degeneration, and dry eye syndrome. New products coming soon. Embrace the science.
We're back with Jen. We're talking about the dark side of bodybuilding. We talked about diuretics before and some of the drugs that are taken. Let's talk about SARMs, selective androgen receptor modulators. What's your opinion on those, and how do they work, and is that used a lot with bodybuilders?
I'll be honest with you, I am not super familiar with that. I think it's become more popular along with peptides, but it wasn't something that I ever experimented with. So my knowledge on that isn't great.
And you talked a little bit about growth hormones. Tell me about growth hormones. I'm always concerned from a medical point of view when people are taking hormones that they could get a side effect of connective tissue problems like carpal tunnel, and that it could raise the LP little a, which is a blood test, a lipoprotein little a, which could make you, if that goes up, it increases your risk of having a heart attack.
Mm-hmm.
It's an inflammatory lipoprotein. So tell me about growth hormone. What was your experience with that? And pro, con, what do you think?
I mean, it was just kind of like a necessity. Like I definitely used that every time that I competed. And, for years, I never came off of it. And I don't, I think the state that I was in and, what I was trying to obtain, I don't think I really thought about then, like the long-term effects or like the negative possibilities that could have come with it. It was just about like trying to be the best.
And how about insulin? Did you ever use insulin?
I never messed around with that. That one was a little too scary for me, but I do know my brother messed around with it. I did know other male bodybuilders that messed around with it, but I never touched that.
Because back in the day, in the Arnold, Frank, Zane day, I'm not sure that they used insulin because their stomach would be flat.
Mhm.
Now with the insulin, because it causes fat to accumulate around muscles, when they're not flexing, the belly tends to bulge with
Mhm.
it. And I was just wondering if you knew anything about that part of it.
I think that, from what I understand, that also comes from, overuse of growth hormone, that the abdomen becomes distended. And that's definitely more common now, but, I never experienced that, luckily.
And do you have a knowledge about clenbuterol?
Oh yeah, I always use that.
All right, tell us about that one.
Okay, well, that was the one I hated the most, but it is like highly effective for fat burning and definitely like a staple in the, cocktail of getting ready for a show. But some people it just like gives a lot of energy to me. It made me like very agitated, very jittery, and like just not nice. Like I hated it, but it was necessary.
And a lot of the bikini girls use that. The bikini the bikini models use it. I guess for some way it just gets rid of increases your metabolism, and
Mm-hmm.
that's how it increases gets rid of the fat. I think it was used as an asthma drug at one time in
Yeah.
some other countries. I'm not sure if it's really even FDA approved in the United States. I don't think it is. I don't think it's allowed in the United States. So all these drugs, people get black market. How do they get
Right.
them?
Over the internet.
Oh, you can buy it over the internet?
Yeah.
And it was it coming from other countries
Yeah.
or it does coming from other
Yeah.
countries?
I mean, most of the time, my coaches had it, whatever, I was comfortable taking, they usually had it, but it's definitely not difficult at all to just order it off the internet.
And people ever arrested because of this?
I
Anybody?
think as long as you keep it for, personal use, they're not really looking for that. My brother did have a package intercepted and the FBI show up at the door that, his friends were involved with putting a big order together with probably the intent to distribute. So when it's a big amount like that, I think it's, a possibility, but when it's these small personal use amounts, it's usually doesn't get caught.
And some of the males, I don't know if females use tamoxifen, which blocks estrogen so they don't get the man boobs, gynecomastia.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that females ever use, the
Yeah,
tamoxifen.
yeah, I've used that. Like, and I don't remember if I used it like the whole entire time, but it's just used to decrease, your estrogen, which makes women hold more fat than men do. So that was common. T3, which is a thyroid drug, that's very common to manipulate your thyroid to get leaner. My last coach didn't like it at all, but since I had taken it in previous shows, it's kind of like his understanding was like once you've done it once to compete, then it's going to be like a requirement. But he was not a fan of that.
And tell me some of the side effects that you've had from all these different medications that you've taken. What were some of the worst side effects and anything that you regret that you took?
I think the Winstrol was one that I really didn't like. It just made my personality really nasty. Really edgy all the time. Like I definitely like look back and think, wow, I was probably like not the greatest mom at that time period because it just made me mean. So I never liked that one. But again, it was kind of like a last 6 weeks staple of things. And I would say as far as regret, whatever changed my voice by accident. I mean, like, my old voice was I liked it a little better.
And have you ever had problems with blood clots or heart problems or things like that?
Not from that. And to be honest, like I was very diligent about getting my blood work done, to make sure that everything stayed in range. So I never had any health consequences. I just think that, afterwards when you try to, go back to normal, then it's, a little bit difficult because the same things that you're doing all along as far as dieting and training, it doesn't work the same.
when I get to the gym, I dread going in there. I got to say, I think a lot of people feel that way. We hate going in, but when we're done, we feel great and we love it. Does a professional bodybuilder hate going in also?
No, because like at that time period in my life, like I was excited because there was something at the end that I was working towards. So like I was like fired up like every time I went to work out, like, oh, I'm gonna do shoulders today, oh, I'm gonna do legs. And I trained super, super hard. Now, on the other hand, there's not that end goal. I'm kind of like, okay, like I've been doing this for half my life now, 23 years, going to the gym every single week. So no, there's not the excitement now, but then there was for sure.
And if you could share your record of amateur and professional, what place did you come in? What's the best you've ever finished?
So the first two I did were in Georgia. Those were amateur shows. I definitely was not lean enough for those shows, so I came in like, last or second to last, those two shows. Then I did not do it again until I was 30. Again, that one was an amateur show, was not nearly lean enough. So the best I did was actually after I had both of my kids. And the best that I did was I got second place in nationals. So I actually missed my pro card by one spot.
Wow, that's great. So tell me about what happens backstage. I understand that sometimes they take shots of salt and vodka, some of the bodybuilders, and why do they do that?
I never saw that, but I saw with the females, some coaches will have them drink like red wine backstage, or some girls would get extremely nervous about the thought of just walking out there, so they would take something for that. That was my favorite part of it. So I never did any of that. I loved walking out there. That was it for me. That was my favorite.
That's a good point. How do you learn how to pose? How do you practice it? What goes into posing?
So my coaches always went over posing with me. I was pretty natural at it, but you learn your standard pose, which you can even learn online. But I think the best thing to do, especially now, because the posing has become a bigger part of it, from my understanding, is that most people have posing coaches. And it's just as important to do that on a weekly basis as it is anything else. Because you
And
have to be able to present and make your body, look a certain way. And if you're standing in a little bit wrong, it's not going to look as good as it could.
and how much time do you devote to practicing posing as opposed to being in the gym?
Oh, I would say I posed for like a few minutes every day, but then I would try to give myself at least one time a week where I made like a session out of it.
And it's been said that posing actually helps increase your muscles or
Yeah,
help.
like hardening and things like that, that just that constant like contraction of the muscle. And I've even had coaches tell me to like flex in between sets, like whatever I was training, like biceps, and you like hold a flex in between to create a hardening effect. So that's pretty common.
And how about summit fever, the psychological phenomenon of knowing that you have a week left to get to the top of the summit? What changes the week before a contest?
Oh, I mean, I wanted to quit every time I was 3 weeks out. And people would say I was crazy because every time I was 3 to 4 weeks out, I was like, I'm not doing this. I just can't, because it's just breaking you. So I think it's survival mode. Those last couple weeks, you're just like trying to feel good enough to stay in it and make it happen. That's definitely the hardest part, is those last couple weeks. You're hungry, you're tired, you're over it.
Then let's talk a little bit about the diet. And people will probably want to know about diet for bodybuilders. Tell us about the diet.
I think that most of my coaches, are definitely the last two that I had, would start out at, so I remember that the last one I started out at like 300 grams of protein, 300 grams of carbs, and 100 grams of fat. So that becomes your baseline. And then every 2 weeks I would go see him, and based on what was happening, how I was doing, he would, manipulate the numbers with the food and manipulate the cardio to keep me dropping at a steady pace. And then towards the end, the last two I always used carb rotation. And it just always works. Meaning start on say it's a 5-day rotation. You start at 100 grams of carbs on day one. It goes 100, 75, 50, 25, 0. The day you do 0, you fat load at night. And then the next day you start it all over again. And it's hard.
And what kind of protein would you be eating?
Right. Mostly chicken and fish, and steak was usually like once a day at night.
And why not steak as much as chicken and fish? Is there more fat and
Yeah, has the higher fat content.
and when we get back from the break, I want to talk about the carbs. You were talking about the carbs. What kind of carbs that you were actually using to decrease? And is there any fat allowed? I mean, for you to have any olive oil or any type of fat. So we're up against the break. This is Dr. Kerry Gelb for Open Your Eyes Radio. We're speaking with Jen about the dark side of bodybuilding. We'll be right back. This is Dr. Kerry Gelb, Open Your Eyes Radio. We're back with Jen. We're talking about the dark side of bodybuilding. Before the break, we talked about diet and we talked about protein. So tell us about what kind of protein you started a little bit about it, but you need to eat a lot. So I guess you're looking for like the cheapest type of protein, tilapia. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so you have 300 grams a day is a lot when you calculate it, and at most you can have like 2 protein shakes. So the rest have to be lean sources of protein. So that's either going to be chicken or fish. And, when you have to eat that kind of amount of it, it's expensive. So tilapia was kind of like the cheap go-to, but yeah, it was disgusting.
And you mentioned that you decrease the carbs as we get closer
Mm-hmm.
to the contest. Tell us about what kind of carbs. Is it fruit and vegetables, or are you eating bread and rice?
No, like there was fibrous carbs, which, there wasn't as much of a limit on, meaning like, green leafy vegetables, but like the, other kinds of carbs that are pretty staple and standard are oatmeal for breakfast, and then either sweet potato, brown rice, sometimes white potato, for the carbs, the rest of the day.
And are you supposed to eat any fat at all?
Well, so like in carb rotation, it's pretty specific. So the day that you have 0 grams of carbs, you have to load fat at night, but it can't be just whatever you want. It's either got to be, almonds or, natural peanut butter or steak or something like that. So, but the rest of the days were typically very minimal in fat.
And what was your food bill like?
Oh, it was a lot. I used to buy my food from Cheney Brothers because it was so much cheaper to do it that way. And my, husband and I were doing it together at the time. So yeah, we were spending a ridiculous amount of money on food.
Crazy. So let's talk about the psychological part of bodybuilding, the rage, whether or not when you stop, if you get depressed. Tell us about that. How does that work into it with the medications, with the drugs that you're using, stopping bodybuilding and going to become a civilian sort of?
Right. I mean, I think that, there's different types of people that handle it differently. I do know, friends of mine that they can compete and be 0% body fat and shredded and then kind of go back to like a per se normal look, which, is typically you gain 15 pounds back relatively quickly. But that was the hardest part for me. I really did not deal well with that and did get typically pretty depressed. And I don't think that's ever really left me like since the last one I did. I think once you've seen yourself like that, even though it's completely impossible to stay like that all the time, you want to. So I think it's been really hard for me, even 12, 13, whatever it's been years later, to like accept that I still have a good body, that other people look at me and still think I look, like an athlete, because I don't see that. I mean, it's gotten better over the years, but I don't think it ever will go away for me.
And how do bodybuilders deal with this depression? How do they deal with it?
I mean, I think it's, something that we find other people that have, had a hard time with it. And so you can talk to about it and you kind of, make each other realize that you're crazy, that you're not seeing it for what it actually is. But I mean, I personally sought, body dysmorphia therapy for it. It was maybe helpful for a little bit of time, but not life-changing.
And tell me about roid rage. I mean, regular testosterone that people do for TRT, testosterone replacement therapy is 1-to-1 anabolic to androgenic. But when you're doing the performance enhancing drugs, it could be as high as 10-to-1 anabolic to androgenic. So tell us about that.
So I didn't see that, for myself. Again, that's because, I really didn't have to like, mess with the what we call the boys side of drugs. But, obviously known a lot of bodybuilders over the years and a lot of males. And I definitely saw that more with them when taking higher amounts of stuff, that just easier agitation and, you know, getting into fights and what have you, because it's like this kind of superhuman feeling is how it's been described to me for guys.
Now you have these big giant guys backstage. Are they like fighting with each other because they're so?
No, backstage is really interesting. You're like just trying everything you can not to like look at anybody else, to compare yourself to anybody else. Nobody really talks to each other that much. It's kind of like staying in your own zone, and doing a little bit of pump up work. So no, definitely didn't see any of that.
So what kind of pump up work do you do before you go out on stage? Are you doing all the body parts? How do you get pumped up?
Yeah, they have like a whole, bunch of stuff backstage, different bands and different weights. And yeah, you're just trying to get a pump to all of your muscle groups. So you might be doing band work with side lateral raises to get a delt pump, or, bicep pump, things like that. And it's pretty typical to hit everything. Some girls didn't pump legs up because that takes away from, like how lean your legs look. So you didn't really necessarily want, because it's harder for females to get their bottom half lean. So you didn't really want to pump that up and lose, that look. But that didn't really affect me because my lower half was always more shredded than my top, actually.
Tell me about protein shakes. What kind of protein do you use? Does it have amino acids in it? My understanding is that it says protein with amino acids. It's actually worse protein than if it's just straight whey. That it's cheaper type protein. They throw the amino acids. Sounds like it's better, but it's actually worse. And I was just wondering, do you still do protein shakes? And when you were doing it, what kind of protein did you use?
I like competing. I became really attached to this whey isolate called Nectar because I had a cookies and cream flavor. And in my starving mind back in those days, I thought it was like a milkshake. That's kind of another thing I have a hard time drinking anymore, just because over 23 years of drinking so many of them, I'm like, ugh, like I'd rather not, unless it's like a pre-made one. But I always use like a whey isolate, never, with amino acids.
And what did you put in with it? What did you
Just
add?
water.
Just protein powder and water.
And then for my post workout, you can use like a fast acting carbohydrate along with your protein. So I would actually take rice cakes and like crush them and put it into the protein shake. So it's fast acting protein and fast acting carbohydrates, like right after a workout.
Wow.
That was actually pretty good.
And what did you notice? Did you notice any changes to your body after doing that?
I think you just felt better after like, being depleted and training. It was like any kind of food was, you're happy to have it.
What's your opinion on creatine? What do you think about creatine? And do you think it's good? Do you think there's because it's hot right now, creatine?
I never, maybe I experimented with it a little bit, but like I have friends that swear by it. I would definitely feel okay with, my teenagers taking it to try to help with, getting a little bit of lean muscle mass. So I think it's good. I just don't have a lot of experience with myself, but it's come a long way.
And how about herbal testosterone enhancers like Tongat Ali or Faguja Orestes? Have you have any experience with that?
I don't, but my brother used to say the only supplements worth buying are the ones you get in Cancun.
Right. You could get anything you would need in Cancun, right?
Yeah,
And,
I know. I've done it.
and do you remember about Andro with Mark McGuire? Remember they found Andro in his locker. And
Vaguely.
do you know what? Did you guys take any of that? Any type of Andro or stuff?
No, I didn't. Mm-mm.
So I mean, you guys would take the real stuff,
Yeah.
You're not taking the herbal stuff.
No, we're not messing around with the GNC crap. We want the real stuff.
So we got about 2 minutes left. I want to go back to the kids. So do you think kids should start lifting weights before puberty or wait till go into puberty?
No, after for sure. Because like you have that issue with like the muscles might be strong and ready for it, but the tendons not necessarily, which then can lead to, injuries and what have you. So I think it's better to wait.
And what kind of exercises do you think kids should start off with when they're starting off and they want to start lifting weights? We're not talking about them taking any kind of drugs or anything, just to lift weights, to look a little bit better and to feel a little stronger if they're playing a specific sport.
I would always say it's best to start with like plyometric body weight stuff and band work, just to, get an introduction and get your body familiar with it before you start like weight bearing exercises.
Tell us what plyometrics is for people that don't know what that is.
Well, anything that's like your own body weight. So air squats, push-ups, pull-ups, those kind of exercises that just use your own body weight.
And air squats is without weight.
Right. Just doing air squats, lunges with no weight, some sprint work for younger people, but I would hold off on like the weight bearing exercises until a little bit older.
Why are bands so popular now? What do they do that's so good?
I don't really know like the scientific answer for that, other than, it's just like resistance without like loading it with weight. And it's still, you can still kind of get that same result. You can get a really good pump out of it with just like high repetition.
Well, we're up against the show. The show is ending. We have about 9 seconds left. I want to thank Jen for joining me, being anonymous. Jen, thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
It was a lot of fun. This is Dr. Kerry Gelb for Open Your Eyes Radio and Podcast.
Your eyes and your vision are under attack. Damaging blue light from the sun, your phone, your computer, your tablet, even light bulbs and car headlights is constantly bombarding you. The good news is our eyes actually already have a line of defense to counter the effects of blue light. This defense is made up of 3 pigments called carotenoids. MacuHealth with Micromicelle, the only supplement with the exclusive patent on all 3 macular carotenoids and Micromicelle technology.
Fitting multifocal contact lenses presents a big opportunity to meet patient needs while growing your practice. Alcon is your partner not only with our innovative portfolio, but through e-learning. Learn to enhance your multifocal strategy today with the Alcon Experience Academy.